High above the valley of Elderglen, thunder rolled not from the clouds, but from hooves. Golden dust leapt from the dry road as the royal caravan sped toward the gates of Bellwether Castle, but no trumpet sounded. No banners waved. Instead, silence followed them, heavy as a held breath. In the shadowed stables below the castle walls, a stable boy named Arlen pressed his ear to the oak doors, heart thudding faster than the hoofbeats. He had heard the whispers among the maids and guards. The king's knights had returned too soon, and something terrible had happened beyond the Fernlight Mountains. Behind those towering peaks, it was said, lay the forgotten border, a realm thick with magic and silence, where no map dared stretch, and no sunlight fully reached the ground. That was where the knights had gone to face a rising darkness. But now they were back, and they were fewer. The portcullis groaned open as the lead horse stopped. Its rider was not the proud Sir Arden or fierce Lady Grelia. It was a young boy no taller than Arlen, wearing armor too large for his frame, with a sword strapped awkwardly to his back backwards. The hilt pointed down, the blade toward his shoulder, as if it had been buckled in a hurry or by mistake. He did not speak as he dismounted. He simply looked at the castle with wide, distant eyes, then turned and helped another horse down the ramp. It carried something wrapped in silver cloth. From high above, the queen watched, her hands clenched white around the balcony rail. She knew what the cloth meant. She also knew the boy's name Kalen and why he had returned with the sword drawn the wrong way. The wind whispered against the stones, carrying with it the first note of a story yet to be told, a story that began not with a battle, but with a backwards blade and a boy who would not raise it. Kalen stood beneath the great hall's golden arches, where light from 1,000 candles danced on polished marble. His eyes stayed low, fixed on the sword across his back. Courtiers murmured behind gloved hands, their voices soft as feathers. "A boy," they said. A child knight returned, where grown warriors had not. The queen stepped down from her throne, her robes sweeping like snowfall across the floor. She placed a gentle hand on Kalen's shoulder but did not remove the sword. Instead, she looked past him, to the silver cloth, now resting on a bier of cedar and rosemary. Then she turned and gave a single nod. Servants moved quietly to close the hall. That night, as the moon rose full and watchful, Kalen stood alone in the garden of statues. A crow landed nearby, tilting its head. Kalen did not move. The wind whispered again, as if trying to lift the words from his mouth, but he was not ready to speak. It was not until 3 days later, when the court mage summoned him to the high tower, that Kalen broke his silence. The mage, a tall woman with hair like spider silk and eyes full of storms, brewed a potion in a bowl of carved bone. She offered no questions, only warmth. She laid a scroll before him, marked with a crimson seal. It was a map not of the kingdom, but of what lay beyond. Kalen traced the route his company had taken through the Fernlight Pass, through the Whispering Groves and across the Blackroot River. His finger stopped at a circle drawn in soot. The mage nodded. That was where the beast had come. Kalen had not wanted to be a knight. Not truly. He had trained with the sword, yes, but always with a soft grip, always careful. His father, Sir Bereth, had laughed sometimes, saying Kalen held his sword like it might cry if struck too hard. Still, he rode with them because he had to, because the darkness was rising and every hand was needed. The creature had no name. It was not like any beast found in stories or painted on shields. It came from shadow, with a face of mirrored glass and a mouth that never closed. It fed not on flesh but on courage. When it found them, deep in the stone-cleft gorge, it did not roar. It simply came forward, silently, until one knight fled and then another. Sir Bereth had stood firm. He raised his sword. Kalen saw his father's hand shake, saw the sweat pour down his face despite the cold, and then, when the beast opened its mirrored mouth, Sir Bereth fell. Kalen had drawn his blade, but not to fight. He had drawn it backward, hilt down, tip across his shoulder, a sign of surrender, of peace. He did not know why, only that something inside him whispered that to raise it forward would be wrong. The creature had stopped. It watched him with its faceless face. Then it turned and vanished into the mist, as though it had never been there at all. The court mage listened, her eyes never blinking. She asked Kalen only one thing: had he been afraid? He had nodded. She told him that was why he lived. Not because he had drawn his sword, but because he had understood something the others had not. In the days that followed, the kingdom whispered anew. A child had faced the beast and lived. Some called him coward, others called him clever. Kalen did not call himself anything. But the queen called him to her chambers one dawn, when the frost still touched the windows. She did not wear her crown. She held instead a letter from the border villages. The creature had been seen again, only now it did not attack. It simply circled, watched, and left. They needed someone to go again, not with a sword raised, but with a question. Kalen did not speak. He only fastened his cloak and placed the sword across his back, backwards once more. This time, he did not go alone. A girl named Leora joined him, small and bright-eyed, with a lute slung over her shoulder. She was not a knight, she was the baker's daughter. But she had sung to the wounded knights when they returned, and her voice made even the hardened guards smile. Then there was Tem, the quiet stable boy, who had watched Kalen from the shadows. He brought no weapon, only a pouch of apples and a wooden whistle carved in the shape of a fox. He said little, but his eyes were always searching, always listening. The three left at sunrise, past the still smoking watchtowers and into the forest path. Birds watched them from branches like tiny sentinels. The river whispered beside them. At night, they slept in old ruins, where ivy draped over broken stone, and Leora played lullabies to keep the cold away. On the fifth day, the mist thickened. Trees stood farther apart, and the sky grew quiet. Then came the mirror silence, that strange stillness, where even the wind forgot how to move. Kalen felt it before he saw it, the breath of something not quite there, brushing past his neck like a forgotten memory. The creature stood ahead, unmoving, exactly as before. Its face caught the dim light and reflected three small shapes back at them. 3 children, no swords raised. Kalen stepped forward. His heart thudded in his chest like a warning drum, but his hands stayed at his sides. Leora played a gentle note, just one. Tem held out an apple, freshly cut, and then the beast did something new. It lowered its mirrored face to the apple, sniffed without a sound, and vanished. This time, something else remained behind, a flower, silver and trembling, growing where the creature had stood. Kalen bent to pick it, but it dissolved into mist before his fingers touched. He did not understand, not fully, but he knew this was not the end. It was the start of something stranger, quieter, and far more important than a war. He turned to his companions, nodded once, and they walked on not toward battle, but toward something the sword could not name. The deeper they wandered beyond the map's edge, the stranger the land became. Trees grew in spirals, their trunks twisted as if dancing in slow motion. Stones hummed faintly underfoot, and once, a trail of glowing moths circled Tem's head before vanishing into the bark of a tree that blinked once like an eye. No road led them, and no stars watched overhead. Only the hush guided them forward, that same soft pull Kalen had felt when the creature first spared him. It was not hunger or fear that moved it, it was something else. Something older than kings, and darker than night, and it was watching. By the 7th day, they reached the hollow glade. It was a place the villagers whispered about, but no one had seen. A meadow of white grass and thorned lilies, ringed with stones as tall as towers. Each stone held carvings that shimmered only when stared at, sideways symbols of grief, of joy, of time forgotten. In the center stood the creature. It did not move, it did not breathe, but its presence stretched through the glade like a deep sigh. The mirrored face turned slowly toward them, reflecting the trio once more. But this time, the reflections moved of their own accord. Kalen saw himself lift his sword in the mirror, though he had not touched it. The mirrored Kalen shouted silently, eyes wild, sword swinging. And in response, the creature shattered him into 1,000 silver shards. The image repeated again and again. Leora screamed, Tem gasped, but Kalen stood still. The creature showed them what would be if the sword was drawn forward. If fear chose their path. Kalen stepped into the ring of stones. The grass crunched like paper under his boots. The creature turned fully to face him. Still, it made no sound. Still, it waited. Behind him, Leora began to hum a trembling melody full of hope and trembling leaves. Tem clutched his fox whistle but did not blow it. Their trust held Kalen like armor. He reached back and slowly unfastened the sword. With both hands, he lifted it not to fight, but to place it on the ground before him. Blade turned toward himself, hilt resting gently in the grass. Then he took one step closer, empty hands raised. The creature rippled. Its body, dark as ink, shifted like smoke. Its mirrored face flickered, reflecting first the sky, then Kalen's face, then the face of Sir Berith, his father. The image held, and Kalen's breath caught. There, in the creature's mirrored skin, he saw his father standing strong, not in fear, but in sorrow. The reflection spoke no words, but Kalen understood. Sir Berith had not died fighting the beast. He had died fighting what he thought. He must be a knight made only of steel. The creature lowered itself, not in threat, but in something that felt like grief. Suddenly, the earth quaked. The ring of stones trembled. One stone cracked from top to root, and a pulse of silver light erupted from its center. The creature recoiled, its form rippling wildly. Out of the light came not a roar, but a voice not loud, but clear as bells under water. It was not the creature who spoke. It was the glade itself. A voice without shape, old as wind, saying only this: balance must be mended, the blade must be chosen anew. Then silence returned. Kalen's sword rose from the grass, lifted by invisible hands. It floated before him, gleaming strangely now, its steel surface rippling like water. Then it turned backward so the blade pointed toward Kalen and the hilt faced the creature. Slowly, Kalen reached out. His fingers wrapped around the hilt. And the moment he touched it, the world shifted. Not with sound, but with memory. Visions flashed before his eyes, knights charging, kingdoms falling, fear used as fire. For centuries, swords had ruled, steel had been law. But not all battles needed blades. The sword's weight changed in his hands. No longer was it a weapon of war. It had become something else, a key. He stepped forward. The creature did not resist. It bowed its head, and Kalen gently placed the flat of the blade against its mirrored face. The glass shimmered. Cracks spidered across the surface. Light bled through the cracks, and the creature's body melted into silver mist. For a heartbeat, it hovered there, a shape made of sorrow and silence, and then it vanished, scattering like stars across the skyless sky. The meadow exhaled. The ring of stones pulsed once with light and then grew still. The white grass turned green beneath their feet. The thorns on the lilies softened and bloomed into bells of pink and gold. Kalen stood, the sword now quiet in his grip. Behind him, Leora stepped into the clearing, her song fading into the wind. Tem followed, breathless, his fox whistle still clutched but never used. Something had changed, not just in the glade, but in Kalen himself. He had drawn his sword backward again, but this time he had not done it in fear. He had done it in understanding. For what he had faced was never meant to be slain. It was meant to be seen. Leora picked a bloom from the grass and tucked it behind her ear. Tem ran his hand across one of the carved stones and smiled, as though it had told him a joke only he could hear. The journey back was quiet. Not silent, but peaceful. They passed the same twisted trees and whispering rivers, but they no longer felt strange. The magic remained, but it no longer hid. When they returned to Bellwether Castle, no horns were blown, no banners waved. But the queen met them at the gate, her eyes full of tears, her hands open. Kaelin handed her the sword. She looked at it, puzzled. Its surface now bore no edge. It had dulled not from age, but from purpose. It could no longer be wielded in anger. The queen understood. She placed the sword in the Hall of Memory, beside the names of those who had fallen, and above it, she inscribed new words. Let no blade be drawn without a question first. Kaelin, Leora, and Tem did not return to the lives they had before. They became guides, not warriors, not rulers, but listeners. Children from all corners came to ask about the creature, about the glade, about the backward sword. And Kaelin would tell them not of battles or monsters, but of choices, of how the bravest thing he had ever done was not to draw a sword forward, but to place it down and listen. And the children listened, because they too had questions. And they too would one day stand in a glade of their own, with fear before them and a choice in their hands. Seasons turned gently over Elderglen. Snow came soft and early that year, blanketing the hills in white hush. In the quiet mornings, Kaelin often stood by the garden of statues, now no longer cold and forgotten. Ivy grew gently around the stone figures, and little birds nested in their cupped hands. One statue, newly placed, held a stone lily and wore armor carved with no crest, no sword, only an open hand. It bore no name, but everyone knew it was the one Kaelin had made. He no longer carried the sword. It rested now in the Hall of Memory, where even the youngest squire could visit. Children would press their palms against the glass and marvel at its dull shimmer, whispering to one another about the strange knight who saved the land by not fighting at all. But Kaelin never called himself a hero. Instead, he spent most of his days walking the quiet trails beyond the castle, where trees stretched wide and open, where the wind still carried songs. Leora would often join him, her lute slung at her side, plucking songs not of battle, but of stars and foxes and blooming things. Sometimes Tem came too, skipping stones or crafting little wooden animals he left in hollows for the birds to find. And in the evenings, under lantern light, the three of them would sit in the small round tower the queen had given them, a place where stories were kept. There, Kaelin would speak with children who had questions. Why did the creature stop? Why didn't you fight? Were you afraid? He always answered with honesty. He told them fear was not weakness, it was a sign of care. That bravery didn't always roar. Sometimes it just stood still and listened. And when asked about the sword, he would smile and say that the sharpest blade he'd ever held was not made of metal, but of mercy. Not all understood, and that was all right. The lessons were not for forcing, they were for growing. And grow they did. One spring morning, the queen called Kaelin to the rose court. She wore her silver crown, but her eyes were gentle. She told him the border villages had changed. Since the creature vanished, the forests had grown richer, springs flowed again. Children spoke of dream foxes and glowing paths. Magic had not left it, had healed. And because of that, she said, the kingdom needed a new kind of knight, not one for war, but for wisdom. Kaelin's heart beat fast at her words. She asked if he would teach. Not with swords, but with stories. Not in stone halls, but under trees and stars. Kaelin bowed his head, not from duty, but from quiet joy. So it was that a new order began knights, not of armor and war, but of understanding. They wore cloaks of deep blue, carried no weapons, and traveled in groups of 3, one who listened, one who sang, and one who noticed. They called themselves the Order of the Backward Blade not because they carried swords, but because they carried stories of when not to raise one. And wherever they went, peace followed. Villages lit lanterns for them. Forests parted gently in their path. Even the winds seemed to sing when they passed. Kaelin, Leora and Tem, remained close. Though they often journeyed apart, their stories echoed through the land, not as legends of glory, but as whispers of kindness. And sometimes, when the moon was full and the night very quiet, a silver mist would curl over the hilltops. In that mist, a mirrored glimmer might appear, watching, waiting, but it never came to harm, for it knew now it had been seen. And being seen, truly seen, was all it had ever wanted. Thus the tale of the knight who drew his sword backward passed into song, into story, into starlight. And long after the last castle crumbled and the last banner faded, children still told the tale in hushed voices by the fire, of the boy who met fear with an open hand and changed the world not with a sword, but with a choice.